Zurich keeps its secrets under glass and order. Ledgers squared, riverbank lights arranged in neat constellations, trams whispering like metronomes. But tonight the city feels colder than the river's skin. You're listening to Somnolent Conspiracies, where we walk the well-lit streets until they turn a corner and step into shadow. Make yourself comfortable if comfort is possible. Bring the kind of patience a detective needs and the kind of courage a parishioner uses when the hymn isn't enough. Our story begins with a room that should have been empty and a refrigerator that should have been silent. The landlord swore the unit was abandoned. The tenants were gone, the key returned, the heating left off to save a bill. Yet on the third night after the eviction, the neighbors heard a child's cry, thin as a thread, steady as a needle, coming from behind a locked door. Police forced entry. The light switch failed. Their breath smoked. And there it was, a tall, white refrigerator freckled with rust, humming in a room without power. They opened it with gloved hands, knowing and not knowing what they feared. No baby, no food, only slabs of ice, a layered cathedral of frost, and on the slick interior walls, lines cut with a patient hand. Runes, said the neighbor who had once dated an archaeology student. Or tally marks. A detective takes a case for many reasons. Duty, money, pride. Tonight our detective takes it because there is a sound that lingers when it has no source, and because guilt loves the temperature of winter. We will follow clues that look like condensation and motives that look like prayer. We will ask what a lullaby becomes when no throat sings it, and what a city remembers when it forgets to be warm. If you're ready, draw closer. The compressor is running. The door is open, and the ice is speaking. The stairwell smelled of detergent and stale coffee, the universal perfume of apartment buildings that believe in order. Zurich wore its midnight like a pressed suit. Seams sharp, cuffs unfrayed. And yet the moment the Kriminalpolizei door ram thudded against the frame of 3B, the building exhaled a breath that belonged to basements and morgues. Breakers off, the patrolman said over his shoulder. Voice clipped by the body cam mic, confirmed at the panel. Detective Mara Kovacs slipped on nitrile gloves and clicked her penlight to a tight cone. She had a habit, she knew it was a tic, and she defended it anyway, of cataloging sounds the way other detectives cataloged faces. Right now there were four. The rattle of the stairwell's iron, the soft cloth talk of uniforms, the winter-slick hiss from the window seals, and beneath, within, as if hiding, the steady, almost consoling hum of a refrigerator. Erlikon could be severe when it wanted to be. The flat had been drained of heat on purpose. Condensation frost limned the corners like chalk lines. Her breath made a brief ghost in the penlight's beam, then vanished. The landlord, a woman with a good haircut and a name tag, Ulrika Mettler, hovered at the threshold, arms knotted under her coat. "I told them," she whispered, as if the room were a chapel. "After midnight, every night, like a baby." Mara nodded once and stepped inside. The living room had been stripped of personality. No prints, no plants, no rugs. Dust held the memory of furniture feet on the parquet in pale squares. Near the kitchen arch, a stack of bureaucracy waited rubber-banded. Invoices, late notices, the rectangle of an eviction in crisp legal Helvetica. She recognized her own city's handwriting as one recognizes a sibling's scrawl from childhood. Clear. A uniform called from the bedroom. No occupants. The hum was louder near the kitchen. Not loud, nothing loud dared, but insistently present, the way a throat clears and waits to be asked to speak. Mara angled the beam into the kitchen. The fridge stood with its back to the wall, tall and white, the enamel freckled where rust had bled through the paint. No light bled from the gap around the door seal. No light anywhere. The overhead switch had clacked dumbly when the entry team tried it. Still the hum threaded the silence. She crouched and touched the power cord where it disappeared behind the unit. Cold as a key. The plug prongs stared at her from the socket. Seated, but the breaker downstairs cut power to the flat. She took the portable multimeter from her kit and clicked the dial over to continuity, then to AC, then, on a thought, to millivolts. The display ticked up from 0 to a persnickety ghost reading and held. "Residual?" the patrolman asked, more to be part of the moment than from curiosity. Or a capacitor singing its last, Mara said. She did not sound like she believed it. She didn't. She stood, gripped the handle, and paused long enough to let the camera catch her hands. Opening the door, she announced. She had learned from bitter experience that the simplest acts, if not narrated, became acts performed in the shadows. The door seal released with a reluctant kiss. Cold poured out in a flat, disciplined wave. It smelled like freezer burn and something older, the way stored air always does when it is let back into the world. Inside, the freezer and refrigerator cavities had become their own weather. Shelves layered with ice had grown like stalagmites from plastic and wire, each tier a different translucence. The interior walls were glossy with rind. But it was the lines that stopped her. Incisions carved into the inner plastic and into the ice itself, some shallow, some violent, all precise. Mara leaned in, letting her breath angle away so it wouldn't fog the view. The lines did not wander. They moved with intention, shallow curves punctuated by vertical hash marks, then deep, angled strokes that cross-cut the plastic with the authority of a carpenter. In places, the incisions caught the penlight hard, edges wet, as if something had scored them recently and the melt had not had time to refreeze. Runes, someone behind her said, or tally marks. Mara didn't answer. She had seen enough human rooms give themselves to symbols. Saints taped over radiators, protection knots under cribs, electrical tape crosses on server racks to ward off random failures. Rituals made of what was at hand. Here what was at hand had been ice and plastic and a patience that had nowhere else to go. She panned the beam slowly. The shelving seams inside, the molded grooves where the manufacturer expected glass shelves to rest, had been enlisted. Certain incisions lined up with those seams, using them as staff lines in a music that had never known paper. Others deepened near the air intake at the back wall, burrowing toward the compressor's throat. "Record this," she said, and the patrolman lifted his phone as another camera. Her own body cam breathed in her collarbone. She reached with a gloved finger and touched an incision near the inner lip of the door. The plastic hummed faintly under her nail. A sympathetic vibration caught from the compressor's low song. The patio window faced the courtyard. Frost had gathered on the latch, thick and clean, as if the metal were an animal that had slept in snow. She checked the sill. No smudges, no prints. The dust that kept to corners retained its pale undercolor. No recent disturbance. "Foot traffic?" she asked. "Dust prints to the bathroom and bedroom," the uniform said, reading from what he could see. "Old. No overlay. Looks like nobody's been in since the last inspection." Mara closed the fridge gently and looked at its face. The hum became a fraction louder when the door sealed. She set the meter to the cord again and frowned. The trickle persisted. She traced the cord with her penlight, followed the wall, the outlet. No power at the breaker, yet here they were. She didn't bother to lecture the room on parasitic feeds and capacitors. She filed the problem in the place in her mind where unsolved things breathed. "Play back the neighbor's clip," she said, and one of the patrolmen, eager to be useful, thumbed his phone and held it out. The video was ordinary. A hallway, a door, a timestamp. On its audio, a silver filament of sound threaded the gloom. A baby's sob, thin and insisting, that rose into the promise of a wail and then, not silence exactly, but the sound being folded and returned to where it started. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Mara took the phone and glanced at the progress bar. She tapped backward, then forward, letting the sounds overlay in her head. She did not look at the picture. She listened with the part of her that archived clocks and engines. "Time it," she said softly. "Ma'am." From cry to cry, they stood for longer than a police minute. Somewhere a neighbor coughed through a wall. The building flexed. The refrigerator hummed. And then, on the recorded clip, the second thread, high, frail, inevitable, slid out of the darkness. The patrolman's thumb counted. He looked at her when it ended. 31, he said. She checked against her own watch, running seconds in her head. 31 again. The wrong kind of perfection. The eviction packet yielded its square truths. Names: Yelena Weiss and Aaron Weiss. Occupation fields: blank. Contact numbers: Inactive. 9 days since anyone had seen them. The landlord's note pinned with the notice. Tenants did not dispute, promised to leave, left key in the mailbox. The heating, Ulrika said defensively. We leave off when there is no one. It is expensive. Who complained? Mara asked. Franz Eschliman, Ulrika said. He is precise. He keeps a log of quiet hours. The landlord produced a photocopy of an old-world man's notion of a spreadsheet, ruled with pencil. At 0:03 on 3 consecutive nights, a mark. Crying, infant-like, duration less than 2 seconds. At 0:34, a line, humming persistent. Mara photographed the page and returned it because people believed more in the originals they could touch. She returned to the fridge and opened it again. The incisions were not random, and now that her eye had resigned itself to their grammar, she saw more. Some strokes were so fine they had only scored the ice. A glass gutter's kiss, leaving the plastic pristine beneath. Others had gone through the plastic into whatever lay behind. At one point the tip had lifted a sliver of paint like a nail snagged on a sweater. The ice had grown around those wounds, suturing them in frost. She leaned in farther and noticed something near the back. A tiny ridge where clear ice turned cloudy, the way a pond becomes opaque where it has trapped air. The ridge had 3 cuts across it, equidistant, and in one of them the edge glittered wet. The water hadn't had time to decide whether it was freezing. On the inner door panel, where cheap fridges molded little balconies for eggs and bottles, someone had carved into the deeper plastic. The strokes there were slow, patient, without jitter. It takes time to cut that deep. It takes a willingness to hear your own breath echo. Her light caught on a set of paired angles that could have been a rune if you wanted them to be. She did not want. She was not paid to want. Detective? The patrolman said from the doorway. He had his phone out again, not for recording this time. The neighbor is here, Eschliman. He insists. 2 minutes, Mara said, and pressed her lips together while she listened. The hum had texture. She let it speak. There was a mechanical flutter somewhere high in the spectrum, an artifact like a damaged fan blade just touching a shroud. She catalogued it without deciding whether it mattered. Her recorder sat on the counter to her right. It traced a faint green heartbeat on its tiny screen. She had set it down without thinking when she first came in. Now she reached and tapped the save flag, out of habit aligning her metadata with her patients. She closed the refrigerator a second time and turned, scanning the kitchen for anything human among all this engineered cold. On the skirting board, half caught by a lost screw, a scrap of paper had wedged itself. Music ruled in blue. The ink had bled, dissolved by moisture into a bruise of notes, but you could still see 4 little bars, a minor key keeping its courage. She slipped it into an evidence sleeve and sealed the top. At the patio window, the condensation kept to the inside of the latch, a pure frost line the outside air hadn't touched. The world beyond the glass, an inner courtyard with bicycle shadows, looked entirely uninterested in them. Detective, the patrolman said again, with the rhythm people use when they are trying not to rush a superior. Mara lifted a hand for patience and took 1 step toward the living room. The hum of the compressor ran a little higher for a breath, then settled. In the empty air, a thread of sound pulled taut and revealed itself. Her recorder's timer ticked over to 0:31. The cry uncoiled in the kitchen, thin as a drawn wire, brief as a paper cut, and vanished, leaving only the hum behind like a throat cleared and waiting. Franz Eschliman was the kind of neighbor who believed civilization was a clock that needed winding twice a day. His sweater had elbow patches he had earned, and he held himself as if wincing from the noise of other people's habits. He took off his cap in the doorway of 3B and pressed it against his chest. "I am a reasonable man," he began, before anyone accused him of the opposite. "I work from home. I respect quiet hours. I keep notes." He produced, like a surgeon revealing an organ, a small notebook whose edges had been sanded by use. They were nice enough, polite, the woman especially. She taped felt to the chairs to save me the trouble of asking. But at midnight, he tapped his book. Always a melody, soft, a hymn almost. And then after they left. His mouth shaped the word as if it led to litigation. This business with the crying. Describe the hymn, Mara said. I am not musical, he confessed, affronted by the limitation. Minor key, old, the kind mothers hum when they are tired. I heard it more than once, detective. It is impossible to imagine such a thing without learning it. Mara glanced at the evidence sleeve holding the water-bruised scrap of notation. Would you recognize 4 bars on paper if you saw them? He looked injured. I read music badly, he said. Not at all. She offered him the sleeve. He peered at it the way people peer at clouds, certain they will not see animals until they suddenly do. Yes, he said, surprised despite himself. That curve, the fall, then the step. Could be that. How often did you hear the song when the tenants were here? Every night for a week. Then less. Then not at all. They were, he considered, religious about noise. They rasped felt under the legs, closed doors gently, would not let shoes stand in the hall. They apologized to me once for a cough. But you heard a hymn. At midnight, sometimes after. He lifted his cap a centimeter higher and lowered it. When do you sleep, detective, if not then? On trains, she said without smiling. Anything else? They had a small blanket. Empty. She carried it. He added, and then glanced at the uniform as if confessing betrayed something. Like a rehearsal. Mara dismissed him with a thank you and the promise of another conversation when he remembered more. He left his card balanced on the stack of eviction papers as if hoping the bureaucracy would absorb his virtue by osmosis. Back in the kitchen, the fridge hummed its agreeableness. Mara kneeled and unscrewed the lower kick plate. Paint flakes sprinkled her glove. The compressor casing waited behind the grill, a black metal football swollen with cold. She angled her light and saw the scars. Dull crescent ripples where solder had bloomed and cooled, a seam not of the factory but of a hand. Someone had opened the housing and married it shut again in a hurry, the way grief performs surgery without anesthesia. Photograph, she said. The patrolman crouched beside her, camera app obedient. Get the bead lines. He did. The casing wore other signs. The faint abrasive halo where a tool had slipped, a thumbprint preserved in grime where the metal ran warm in better days. Between the compressor and the intake throat, an improvised baffle had been added, a thin rectangle of polymer bent to shape and zip-tied where no zip-tie belonged. When the unit breathed, the baffle trembled almost invisibly, a reed with no music until air made it so. She slid the kick plate back on and stood. The hum resolved in her ear as a chord she could almost spell. She held her recorder close to the door seam and let the machine take its own notes. The cry, when it came again, nested in the low atonal bed like a thin string above a drone. Her spectrogram eye, the one she didn't know she owned until this job taught her to, found the flutter she'd marked before. A metallic modulation near the high end, like a fan blade nicking its shroud. Fan, she murmured, or something pretending to be one. Leah Brunner, their tech, arrived in a parka and a ponytail that did not admit night hours as an excuse. She carried a thermal camera and a brief contempt for whoever had decided warm buildings were optional in winter. You asked for pictures, she said, slipping a boot toe under the cord to check the plug as if it might flinch. You also asked for a reason to believe in ghosts. Give me either, Mara said. I'll pay full price. Leah swept the thermal lens across the walls, the window, the refrigerator. The world in her eyepiece turned to a pulp comic of blues and oranges. Breakers off downstairs, Leah said as a greeting to the absurd. And yet, she tilted the camera until it saw the compressor. Warmest thing in the room by 20 degrees. Residual? The patrolman offered, hoping a second use of the term might endear it to the facts. Residual my... Leah caught herself and remembered rank exists. Capacitors give you seconds. Maybe a minute if you have a generous God. This? Hours. Mara's penlight found the incisions again, this time with an engineer's malice. She followed the grooves, mapped where they deepened and shallowed. Look at the shelf seams, she said. Leah leaned in. Ha! The molded rails for the missing glass shelves served as channels, herded by the carved lines toward the back intake. In places, shallow grooves directed meltwater where it would refreeze into ridges, thickening the airflow's edges. "He taught the plastic to sing," Leah said, unable to help herself. "And then he taught the ice to be a choir." "Or she," Mara said, letting the pronoun hang. Leah lifted the thermal again, then swapped for the acoustic scanner, a handheld array that looked like a toy UFO designed by accountants. She traced the face of the fridge in little arcs, watching peaks gather on the display. "The cry's not coming from a speaker," she said after a minute. "It's a pressure resonance that rides the thermostat cycle. When the compressor kicks, intake pressure changes, air moves over cavities, cavities whistle. The cadence lines up with the compressor interval, 31 seconds. Give or take a second for temperature drift." "Whistles don't consonant," Mara said. "There's a breath at onset." Leah nodded, grim. "I hear it too. A little H. That isn't a vibration of plastic, but a vibration of throat. But it's faint. Could be contamination." "From what?" the patrolman said, inviting the specter to answer for itself. "From the world," Leah said. "From someone humming in the hall at the wrong time. From your own imagination. Or from a layered source." They let the hum play. It was the steadiness that felt least human. Human beings fail at perfect timing unless machines bully them into it. But the cry looped with the confidence of an algorithm, save for that edge, a fricative onset that wanted to be breath. Mara reopened the door and touched one of the wet-edged cuts with the back of her glove. A clear bead trembled, too cold to believe in itself, then decided, under the light's encouragement, to creep. "Fresh," she said. "Someone recut this within hours. Or the frost sublimated enough to expose what was already there." Leah countered, because that was her job, to deny the obvious until it earned its keep. Still, clean edges. Mara closed the door again and felt the seal compress. A small domestic intimacy. She gestured toward the wall. "We need this unit out and on a bench," she said. "We need a controlled environment. We need to know what is resonance and what is theater." "I'll file the paperwork," the patrolman said, a man volunteering to push a glacier. "Start with a thermal and acoustic sweep," Mara told Leah. "Map the nodes. I want a diagram of every groove that contributes and every groove that's decorative, if any are." "And the power?" Leah asked, and finally they stopped pretending they were not sharing a hallucination. Mara's phone buzzed. "Facilities." She thumbed speaker and held it between them. "This is Shad at facilities," the voice said, satisfied to be the messenger of unpleasant clarity. "Confirming service to 3B was terminated 14 days ago at meter. Breaker in unit also off. Only trickle you'll see is from line capacitance. There is no supply." Leah met Mara's eyes over the little black rectangle. The refrigerator hummed, pleased to be itself. Somewhere inside the walls of the building, Winter laid a finger to its lips and asked them to listen better. "So," Shad said, mistaking their silence for misunderstanding, "you have no power." Mara looked at the scars on the compressor housing, at the improvised reed, at the grooves that aimed air like a prayer. "Copy," she said. "No power." She ended the call. The hum kept time, patient as liturgy. "Then it runs on belief," Leah said lightly, and then, ashamed of the joke, added, "Or on something nobody told us about." "Find the something," Mara said, "and we'll see what belief is left." Ulrika Mettler signed her name like a person who had been trained to tidy the world with a pen. In her office downstairs, a room with a potted plant too green for the month and a photo of Lake Zurich pretending to be calming. She slid a manila folder across to Mara and arranged her face into civic concern. "I should have reported earlier," she said. "I know this, but they were trying to do a good thing." "The good thing being?" Mara asked. "Adoption." Ulrika tapped the folder as if rhythm might absolve her. "They said they had a review scheduled, that everything would be resolved. I gave them a week, then another. I have tenants who throw parties at 2 in the morning, detective. These two apologized to me for a door hinge. I am not made of stone." Mara let the folder sit, cooling the desk. When did you last see them? 9 days before the notice. Ulrika's good haircut moved a fraction when she shook her head. She was carrying a small knitted blanket. No, baby. He did the talking. Mara lifted the folder. The first page was bitterly familiar. Arrears calculations, fees stacking like wind-blown leaves against a fence. Under that, a neat log of calls placed and not returned. One post-it flagged a date in careful handwriting. Please, until after the home assessment. Do you know where they worked? Mara asked. Ulrika spread her hands. He did odd jobs. She kept the house. They paid in on time until they didn't. Access, Mara said. The handyman has a key set for emergencies, Ulrika said, catching herself and tucking a strand of propriety back behind her ear. Only for leaks and the usual. He signs in. I sign him out. Name, Reto Dubs. She paused. He is reliable. Mara thanked her and stepped out into the stairwell's clean echo. She had seen cities keep secrets in files so neat they could have been glass. The trick wasn't opening them. It was reading what they thought they didn't say. Asterisk. The social services building tried to smell like paper instead of detergent. A receptionist with a kindness that had been professionally laminated directed Mara to a public terminal and a stack of forms she had no intention of filling out. The request for private data would take days. The outline, the bureaucratic shadow, was available now. The electronic file for Yelena and Aaron Weiss was a grid of gray boxes with phrases like "see attached," "sealed," and asterisk, partially redacted per privacy statute. Asterisk somewhere inside those boxes. Lives had been reduced to checkmarks and the absence of them. The summary, however, remained. She read it twice. The application had been rejected. The reason code referenced asterisk, neonatal loss, unresolved. Asterisk, another line cited asterisk, recent noise complaints. Asterisk, the phrase sat there as if noise were a character disorder. She printed the summary and slid it into an evidence sleeve. On the way back to the lift, she stopped before a corkboard of community photos and notices. Donation drives, parenting classes, lectures. The kind of bulletin board that achieved warmth by aggregation. Half hidden under a flyer for a pram exchange, a photograph pinned at an angle showed a community center lecture. Not formal enough to be academic, earnest enough to have its own gravity. Binding songs. Folklore and infant soothing read the caption in German and English. A woman in the front row stared at the camera with the stubborn calm of a person practicing normalcy. Yelena by the face. Late 20s or the hard early 30s grief gives you. Around her wrist, a thin metal bracelet with engraved angles that could have been enamel decoration. Could have been runic letters if you wanted them to be. Next to the presenter's name, asterisk asterisk Professor Dieter Gans asterisk asterisk. Someone had typed a social tag. A search on her phone pulled up a university page with a schedule. Public lectures, Nordic epigraphy, folk apotropaics, kitchen sigils against spoiled milk. The contact field offered an email address that would never be read at midnight and a phone number that might. Mara photographed the board, then the lower corner of the photograph where a hand, Aaron's perhaps, lay on the empty knit blanket as if anchoring it to the world. Asterisk. Reto Dubs met her at the service entrance with a toolbox that had done honest work and a smile that practiced innocence in the mirror. He was mid-30s with the forearms of a man who trusted torque more than talk. A beanie pulled low, eyes that tried to be friendly and mostly achieved wary. I don't like police in my buildings, he said, by way of greeting. Means something broke. Something did, Mara said. She didn't offer him the relief of a smile. He took her to a closet where the building kept its spare parts and its unspoken histories. Shelves of gaskets in plastic sleeves, bags of screws, a box of faucets whose chrome dreamed of better bathrooms. A sign-out sheet with names and dates and lies written in neat block capitals. You accessed 3B 3 weeks ago, Mara said, placing a finger on his name. Twice. Reason code. Seal replacement, he said quickly. Fridge. The door wasn't closing right. Bled the lines, too, because the unit was freezing up. You don't want ice to grow in places it shouldn't. It makes sound. What kind of sound? Mara asked as if she were asking about weather. Reto's beanie twitched. Rattles. Whistles. Neighbors complain. Did you do anything else in their flat? Mara kept her tone conversational, the way people ask about weekend plans before adding a knife. Reto lifted both hands. I don't do other things. I don't add things. Receipts, Mara said. For parts. He hesitated the way mechanics do when the honest answer is in the glove compartment of a car you can't search. Most I have here. He produced a plastic envelope of receipts and laid them out like tarot. Gaskets, tubing, silicone. Then, farther back in the stack, a purchase that didn't match the usual. Peltier modules, solid-state cooling tiles, and a lithium power pack slim enough to slide into a pocket. Mara watched his face as he watched her reading it. For a different job, Reto said too quickly. Which you can document, Mara said. He swallowed. Not tonight. Mara let the pause unfurl between them until it had its own smell. Then she slid the envelope back toward him. You'll bring the documentation, she said, and you'll stop guessing what I can already prove. The only thing you control is whether you become the story or just a paragraph in it. He lowered his eyes. They were nice, he said. The couple. The woman. She spoke to the fridge as if it could be reassured. How do you reassure a machine? Mara asked. The same way you reassure a child, he said, quietly and with your hands. I told them about the seal. He paid me cash and asked where to buy a better silencer. The beanie twitched again. I told him to go to a shop on Militerstrasse. They do customs. Customs, Mara repeated, tasting the euphemism. Like mufflers for things that hum. He didn't answer. Asterisk. Bank statements don't have expressions, which is why they can be more damning than faces. With a warrant and a clerk who had learned that not helping police was a kind of career risk, Mara paged through the Weiss's account. The numbers behaved themselves until they didn't. Rent, groceries, train passes, nothing, and then a set of withdrawals in amounts rounded like the edges of stones in a river. Cash jobs rarely left receipts. Cash payments left shapes. One deposit labeled Severin Milita. Another set of smaller charges at a repair shop on Militerstrasse that claimed to service appliances and did not say what else it serviced. The pattern in her head grew lines like a schematic. Reto to seal and bleed, the couple to the shop for something quieter that was not quiet in the right way, then to a university lecture where meaning could be borrowed for the price of a handout. In the kitchen of 3B, she opened the refrigerator's inner door again and studied the deeper carvings. Some runes wore their angles like costumes. Others had the pared-down urgency of tally marks. She held a reference printout from a standard Elder Futhark chart, a prop more than a map, and compared. Her mouth shaped soundless phonemes as she traced. If you squint, Leah said at her shoulder, you can get breath from that one. And keep. Maybe bind. Maybe hush if you forgive a lot. Maybe wishful reading, Mara said. She had learned to respect the appetite of the human head for meaning the way sailors respect undertow. Or maybe someone carved instructions in a language that would agree with them. Leah sniffed, then regretted it as the freezer's air stung. You going to tell me the next part is a professor of dead alphabets? I'm going to ask a professor of living superstitions, Mara said. She touched her phone, scrolling to the number under the photo on the corkboard. And then I'll have a conversation with a man who sells modifications to things that are supposed to be boring. She set her recorder back on the counter and let it drink the room again. The hum filled the kitchen like intention. 31 seconds became a kind of metronome, counting down the space between breaths. On the floor near the baseboard, where the skirting met tile, a thread of water had traced a line and frozen in place, a fine hyphen the color of glass. The city kept its secrets under glass and order. Tonight the glass learned new words. Mara hit call on Professor Dietergans and pressed the phone to her ear. In the silence between rings, the cry rose, thin and exact. Her recorder flagged the mark automatically, 031, and waited for the next one. The university building wore night like a borrowed coat. Formal, a little ill-fitting, quiet at the seams. In the faculty wing, the corridor lights were timed to kindness. They woke as Mara's steps approached and dimmed when she passed, as if reluctant to spend extra electricity on doubt. Professor Dieter Gans opened his office door with the half-distracted politeness of a man coaxed out of a footnote. He had the dignity some academics grow like moss. White hair, collar unworried by fashion. Hands that had held too many index cards to shake for ordinary reasons. On the wall behind him, maps of alphabets, photographs of hearthboards carved with pinwheels and stars, a shadowy and larger print of a kitchen lintel scored with symbols that had kept butter from turning 150 winters ago. "You brought me a fridge," he said, amused without apology. Not the first time someone has tried to make an appliance a shrine. Mara set the photo prints on his desk. The interior shots of grooves and incisions, the wet-edged cuts, the shelf seams enlisted into staff lines. She placed a USB drive next to them, labeled in a neat hand, "Audio, 3B Cry, Raw." "I brought you the writing," she said, "and its voice." Gans slid on a pair of half-moon glasses and leaned over the images until his breath fogged a corner of glossy paper. He did not make the mistake of naming what he saw too early. He let his face do the work of thinking. A tightening around the eyes, a softening at the mouth. He touched one photo with a knuckle, as if it might be rude to lay a finger on the page. "Not purely Elder Futhark," he said at last, almost to himself. "You know this. I know when people squint at scratches and see meanings they want," Mara said. "I'm asking whether anything here is more than wishful reading." He nodded. "Elder Futhark is a small, severe music. What I see here borrows 2 or 3 letters, yes. These angled strokes, this pair could be G, that could be B if one forgives the slant. But..." He traced a different cluster, softer cuts curved like the edge of a spoon. "These are not runes. These are Hossichan household marks, Alpine kitchen sigils, folk apotropaics. You carve a star on a breadboard and the milk will not sour as quickly. You scratch a little ladder on a doorpost and things that climb. Fever's creditors have a harder time coming in." Mara lifted a brow. "Theology by groove." "Therapy," Gans corrected gently. "Working-class magic is always therapy. The world is unmanageable. The hands want work. And..." He tapped another photo where the grooves deepened near the back intake. "Directionality. Someone who knew nothing would carve a charm flat as a picture. Here the cuts are deeper as they approach the intake, as if the carver believed the air needed instruction. Not stop evil, but carry this." "Carry what?" "A prayer, if you ask a grandmother." Gans smiled without mockery. "An instruction, if you ask a mechanic." He slipped the USB into his laptop and played a minute of the audio. The office was so quiet that the hum from the tiny speakers felt like a violation. When the brief cry braided in, the professor's face did not change. "You want me to hear a baby," he said, not unkind. "If I were a mother who had learned to sleep with a radio on to drown out a void, I would hear a baby. If I were a physicist, I would hear a reed pipe. You're a philologist who collects kitchen doors." He laughed, delighted by the insult because it was accurate. "Listen," he said, and backed the audio up to the cry's onset. "Hear this breathy consonant at the start? HH, the exhale before the whine. Plastic does not do this, but cavern systems do." He flipped a book open on his desk. A spiral-bound stack of photocopied seminar notes, diagrams of flutes, airflows, resonance chambers. What happens when you run air over a cavity whose edge is slightly softened by melt? You get a laminar flow with periodic shedding. You can make what the untrained ear insists on calling voice. Except, Mara said, when we tried to fake it in a test chamber, we could match the interval and most of the vowel-like quality, but not the onset. We couldn't get the breath. 2 sources layered, Gans said easily, as if this were a recipe. Your machine does the vowel. Someone else, something else, gives the consonant intermittently when the system allows it. Pareidolia, Mara said flatly. He shrugged, expansive. A very useful word if you don't want to think about what grief can teach a house to do. He turned back to the photos and tapped a pair of adjacent angles. These 2 together are often misread by amateurs as bind. They are much more often a maker's mark turned sideways. Here, another cluster. This looks like keep, because you want it to, and this. His finger hovered over a crisp little fork of lines. Has been mistaken for hush since the 19th century in every folk collection I assign. I can give you a list of misread pairs. 2 of them appear here exactly mirrored. List them, Mara said, and Gans scribbled on a scrap, his handwriting the same disciplined chaos as the marks he studied. She photographed the note for the file and let him keep the paper. He sat back and steepled his fingers. You said voice as if it were the thing you care about least, he said. What is it you care about most? Intention, Mara said. If you tell me these marks are not mere doodles, then someone meant them to work. If they meant them to work, what did they think they were doing? Gans folded his hands over the photographs. Do you know the phrase binding songs? I saw your flyer, Mara said, and a woman, Yelena, at your lecture. Yes, pretty no, that's the wrong word. Asterisk fierce star. There is a way fierce people look when they are trying to be compliant. She had that. He tapped his temple. She came up afterward and asked about chants for colicky infants. There's a Moravian cradle song that is less a melody than a breath with a note running through it. She wrote down only the intervals, not the words. Because words would be wrong? Mara asked. Because words commit, Gans said. Some people are not ready to say the names. They want the shape without the mouth. He leaned forward, elbows carefully not touching the photographs. You asked what they thought they were doing. They were teaching the air. Imagine it. You cannot console what is gone. You cannot bring it back. But you can make the air move in a way a body would recognize if it were there. That is both nonsense and precisely how machines work. They wanted the intake to hum like a throat, the frost to behave like a palate. They tried to build a place where lullaby could live without a singer. Mara watched the professor's gentle gravity and felt, irritably, the little rise of respect grief earns when it refuses to quit. And if I say that's superstition dressed as engineering? He tilted his head. Then I say all engineering was once superstition with schematics. And I remind you of pareidolia. His smile returned, apologetic, like a rain returning to a window. If we cut grooves wherever we fear silence, we will inevitably read meaning when the house settles and the pipes talk. He pushed one of the photos closer to her. But these cuts here, they are too tidy for fear alone. The person who did this was not trembling. They were diagramming. The laptop dinged with an email, the sound of small modern urgencies. Gans ignored it. Mara did not. The name in her notifications had the grease of machines on it. Severin Blockledger. She had sent the repair shop a nighttime query from the corridor and not expected an answer before morning. She opened the message. Cash job, it read, as if that were a perfectly neutral phrase. Man wanted invisible speaker. Told him no, we don't do playbacks. He said not audio, wanted compressor louder. To sing. Sold him diamond scribe. He refused microspeaker. Too impure. Gans watched her eyes track the text and raised his brows. Impure. Someone thought speakers would be cheating, Mara said. She forwarded the email to the case folder and slid her phone back into her pocket. If the air can hold a prayer, a speaker would be a lie. And the lie would not work, Gans said softly, finishing a theology he had not sworn to. He closed the laptop with the care of a man lowering a lid over something still moving. Detective, I will give you what I can. A short report explaining the marks I know and the ones people only pretend to know. I will put the word pareidolia in it for your colleagues who need it. And I will also write, in small type, that houses can be taught to make certain noises by carving their throats just so. Whether that helps your grief is none of my business. It helps my case, Mara said. She gathered the photos, leaving him one copy for the report. At the door, she paused. If a person believed the air could carry a name, if they taught the appliance to hold a lullaby, what would that person do next, when the song didn't change the world? Gans looked at his wall of kitchen lintels, all those little ladders to nowhere. Find a colder room, he said, and carve deeper. The corridor lights brightened obligingly as she left, then dimmed with an economy the university prized. Outside, The river kept its winter under control, even if the air had learned to whisper otherwise. Militerstrasse kept its shutters half down even in daylight. At night, the street wore its metal teeth. Roller doors tattooed with old tags, a watchmaker's sign glowing like a patient eye, a kebab stand tasting of salt and thaw. The repair shop sat between a locksmith and a place that sold spare parts for appliances that had fled fashion but refused death. A bell on the door coughed when Mara pushed it. The air smelled of flux, rubber, and coffee boiled to penance. "Severin Blockliger?" she asked the room. A man unfolded from behind a counter piled with housings and fan cages. He was built like a reliable hinge, work shirt sleeves shiny at the elbows, hair cut by practicality. His hands wore an old burn as if it were a wedding ring. "Depends who's asking," he said, then saw the badge and did not bother with surprise. "Detective, you wrote. You have a unit that sings." "I have a unit that insists," Mara said, "and a couple who paid you cash." Severin lifted one shoulder. "A lot of people pay cash. It's a very old technology. Tell me about the man who wanted the compressor to sing." He scratched the back of his neck, the gesture of a man selecting memory like a part from a tray. "Came in 3 weeks ago. Quiet, precise. The kind who listens while you talk, which is not as common as you'd hope. Said he had an old refrigerator, thin walls, lots of plastic. Wanted to make the hum a little louder, but not higher. He kept saying not audio, like if I reached for a speaker he'd walk out. I offered a microspeaker anyway. He called it impure. Impure. He wanted air to do the work, the machine's own breath. That's what he said." Severin's mouth twisted. He had the face of a man who would forgive many things but not nonsense done badly. "So I told him what anybody who's taken apart enough junk knows. Pressure and intake shape make noise. You want more tone out of the same hum, you change the breathing. I sold him a baffle housing that bolts in at the intake throat, thin polymer, modified for less turbulence and more sympathetic vibration. I threw in a pair of auxiliary microfans that draw very little." He asked for diamond scribing tools. I asked what he planned to cut. "Glass," he said. He didn't look like a stained glass man. "Names? Didn't ask. Didn't write. Cash." Severin eyed her, weighing how much to guess and how much to surrender. He had hands like a person who tightens things until they squeak but stops before they snap. The woman waited outside. She looked tired. She was holding a knit blanket like it weighed something. "Empty," Mara said. "Empty," he agreed softly. He led her past the counter to a back bench that had become a topography of parts. On a rolling cart sat a half-gutted demonstration unit, a refrigerator carcass with its exterior panels stripped and its shame showing. "You trucked yours out yet?" he asked. "Paperwork's a glacier," Mara said, "but we've mapped the airflow. We know what you did in principle. Show me what you sold him." He held up the polymer throat, a rectangle bent into a shallow mouth, its inner edge chamfered. "Standard housing makes peace with efficiency," Severin said. "This one tolerates a little inefficiency in the name of a cleaner laminar edge. You see here? I cut it so the intake lip sings when air schemes it. Most customers want less noise." He smiled. "Occasionally, someone wants the opposite." He zip-tied the housing into place with the care of a parent fitting a splint. Then he clipped 2 slender fans into the channel upstream, aftermarket, low-draw, whisper class. He plugged the cart into a power strip and let the unit begin its slow, self-important hum. "Takes a minute," he said. "Machines like to be courted." While they waited, Severin dug in a drawer and laid a set of tools on the bench. A pen-sized diamond scribe, a glass cutter with a wheel sharp enough to shave light, a file that had seen long service. "He bought these," Severin said. "Scribe is overkill for plastic. It's for etching hard surfaces. But plastic freezes hard when it's coated in ice. You can cut a very clean throat if you're patient." The compressor caught its rhythm. Air began to move with purpose. The throat housing took a little of that movement and turned it into suggestion. The tone emerged. Not a melody, not even a note. Just a beleaguered flute's ghost. A thread the ear could tug at. It made the hair along Mara's forearms admit it could stand up if asked. "Now narrow your edges," Severin said, and slid a strip of thin acetate along the lip. The tone focused, then thinned, as if a mouth had rounded itself around a vowel. "You can get intervals even," he said almost apologetically. "You change the geometry, you change the tone. You want a longer interval, you tie it to the thermostat. The cycle breathes you a rhythm." 31 seconds, Mara said. "Depends on the unit," he said, but did not contest the number. Mara watched the reed vibrate, the plastic nodding in agreement with physics. Her mind layered the cry from the flat onto the sound and found most of the shape but not the skin. "We can't get the breath," she said. "Because you're not running a throat, you're running a mouth," Severin said. "You'd need a leak, something that opens for a split second right at onset. A hairline somewhere, a flap lifting. Or," he shrugged, "the world is noisy. Sometimes it answers you by accident." "Did he say why?" Mara asked. "Why he wanted the machine to sing?" Severin looked at the dead compressors stacked like black hearts on a shelf and decided. He said if the air could hold a prayer, maybe it could hold a child's calm. Maybe calm would live in the house, even when nobody sang. The bell on the front door coughed again. A courier slid a parcel onto the counter and left without interest. Severin wiped his palms on a rag and turned back to the cart. The unit whirred. The reed whispered. The little flute bled its dignity into the room. "Does this offend the building code?" he asked lightly. "Illegal wiring offends the building code," Mara said. "We'll get to that. Look." He pulled out his phone, thumbed a search and turned the screen toward her. Security footage from his own door camera. A still of the couple outside his shop. Aaron in profile, hood up, eyes focused inward on something not forgiving. Yelena half-turned, the blanket in her arms as if the street might jostle it. Severin scrubbed the scrubber. The man appears again later, leaving with a small bag heavier than its size. "He paid," Severin said. "He thanked me. He said he would finish the last set before midnight." "Last set," Mara repeated. "Of grooves. Of something," Severin said. On her way out, beneath a streetlight that had been scolded into staying on, Mara thumbed a request for nearby municipal CCTV. The response from the network came faster than bureaucracy had any right to move. Cameras did not sleep. 5 blocks away and 3 nights ago, at 2:11, a lens caught a man carrying a tool bag along the limit's edge, jacket zipped against the hour. Another figure fell in step, red O-dubs, hat pulled down, face in profile for just long enough to count his fate. They veered toward the Weiss's building. She forwarded the clip to the case file and walked the city in her head. From shop to river to stairwell, down into the flat where cold rehearsed itself. Her phone vibrated against her palm with the insistence of something that had been trying you for a while and had finally got through. "Brunner," she said, answering. "Tell me you have a map." Lee's breath crackled softly. Thermal finished. Acoustic nodes plotted. "You were right about the shelf seams, they're acting like ducks. But that's not why I called." "Make it the reason," Mara said, already turning toward the tram stop. "We pulled the inner back panel," Leah said, her voice lowering as if the refrigerator could hear her. "You can't see it unless the ice is grown in and the light hits from the side. Behind the plastic, on the insulation, there's a heat signature that doesn't belong. Compressors here, a rustle of paper. Intake here. Okay, now center right, palm-sized. Warmer than the surround, cooler than the compressor. Shaped like a hand." "Someone leaned in," Mara said. "Heat transfer. Except the panel behind it shows compression, like something pressed from the inside. The print is inverted, and the heat persists longer than it should with the breaker off. We're chalking it to trapped air warmed by the compressor and migrating." "But Mara," Leah almost never used her first name on calls. "The shape is too clean. 5 fingers. Spread." Mara stood in the middle of the pavement and let the city move around her. Behind a window, someone practiced a scale on a piano very softly, a hand negotiating what a hand remembers. "Bag the panel," she said. "Photograph everything. Don't touch the print." "We already didn't," Leah said. Detective. Say it, Mara said. It looks like someone pushed out, Leah said. From the wall where nothing is. The tram told time with its bell. The river kept its logic. The phone was warm against her ear, and the night was teaching air to carry more than one kind of sound. They built winter in a room that had no business hosting weather. Leah commandeered a service lab in the basement of the precinct, the one with the vented hood and the insulted coffee machine. She had requisitioned a chest freezer, a plexiglass test chamber, a benchtop compressor, and a tangle of ducting that made the space look like a small organism learning to breathe. On a whiteboard, she drew the schematic of 3BS refrigerator in 3 colors: factory intent in blue, aftermarket in black, carved deviations in red. Intake here, she said, tapping the red. We'll copy the throat housing Severin sold him. Polymer chamfer, same lip geometry. Auxiliary fans upstream. Same thermostat logic. Mara took a seat at the periphery and let the lab's layered buzzers catalog themselves. Fume hood, air handler, the compressor's new cough coming online. A single strip light hummed with the faint, saintly intent older buildings bestow on their electrics. Leah held up a rectangle of polymer. The twin of the baffle housing Severin had shown them. Cut on the same jig, she said. Borrowed his template. He was flattered. I told him it was for science, which may be the politest way to say suspect your customers. She zip-tied the throat into place on the plexiglass chamber, fed ducting to the compressor, and set a pair of slender fans in the intake tube. She had labeled each component with masking tape and a number, as if the parts might try to go missing unless kept accounted for. And the grooves, Mara said. Leah wheeled over a tray. On it lay a scratch-awl and a pen-sized diamond scribe. The awl had the friendliness of a tool that had opened paint tins on weekends. The scribe looked like a surgeon's pencil. We'll grow ice first, Leah said. Then carve while the layer's stable. Diamond for the hard, awl for the plastic beneath. We'll start with channels that copy the shelf seams, same spacing, same depth ratios. Then we'll do the signature cuts we mapped in 3B. How long to grow ice? Mara asked. Leah glanced at the temp readout. Hours for scaffold, minutes for surface. But we can cheat. Salt the outer wall to push sublimation, refreeze with a spritz, get that coarse lamination we saw in the photos. The trick is keeping the layer constant long enough for the airflow to stabilize. They made winter. Condensation seeded the chamber's interior walls as a white pelt, then thickened into glass, then burst into the micro ridges that grow when air drafts decide to sculpt. Leah spritzed with a mister, salted the outer panel with a shaker that once belonged to a canteen, then wiped and spritzed again. When the ice had the right faint milky opacity, she laid the diamond scribe against it and began to draw. She didn't copy the runes. She copied the intent. Curves that intersected shelf channel spacing, little crosscuts that behaved like consonants to the broader vowel of the intake. The diamond point hissed faintly on the ice. Under the light, the grooves took on a wet-lipped shine. Listen, Leah said, stepping back. The compressor's throat voiced its original shapeless breath. As the ice settled and the fans nudged the intake pressure into a narrow range, a tone emerged. Subsidiary, accidental, a thin ribbon laid atop the hum. It wavered as thermostats waver, but its presence was undeniable. Spectrogram, Mara said. Leah had already split the audio into a live display. On the laptop, the hum squatted as a long band, charcoal dark. Above it, a pale filament rose and fell like a heartbeat tracking. Leah marked the interval with a ruler, a rectangle of transparency held against the screen. 31 seconds, she said, satisfied and annoyed at once. Our unit, our room. We're not cheating. It's the cycle. The tone wasn't a cry. It was the suggestion of a mouth that had never been born. Leah adjusted the intake lip with a sliver of acetate, narrowing and widening the edge by millimeters. The tone focused the way a camera does when it finds a face. Now for the consonant, Leah said, and looked like a person making herself try a word she didn't quite believe in. She cut 3 shallow notches into the ice at a place that mimicked the back of a throat. These are our HH chambers. Onset only. If it works, The edge vortices shed their first. They waited. The cycle did what cycles do. Chilled, paused, let its pressure equalize, then inhaled. The tone rose again, and this time at the very front of it, an aspirate scraped in. Brief as a fingertip on paper. It made Mara's shoulders know they had tensed. "Close," Leah said, eyes gone bright. She ran the spectrogram back and zoomed at onset. "Look at that fussy little band. A broad, noisy smear. Not a clean resonance. That's turbulent flow. It's breath adjacent." They repeated the cycle. The onset aspirate appeared, and then it didn't, in the perverse way things do when you want to demonstrate them. Leah made 2 more cuts, deeper, and shifted the microfans by a hair. The aspirate returned, almost compliant. "You can make a house fake a syllable," Leah said, writing the sentence into the whiteboard as if that would make it less ridiculous to say aloud. But our cry," Mara said, "has a harmonic riding the main band that registers like a human overtone. The test chamber gives me the shape but not the overtones." Leah pulled the raw recording from 3B and laid it alongside their lab spectrogram. She matched scales, matched gain, aligned the thermostat cycle. The 2 graphs stood like twins. Identical, but for the skin. "There," Mara said, pointing. "Ours is glass. Theirs has a presence." Leah nodded. "Either there's a second source layered on top of the intake, something living, something with vocal tract complexity, or we're seeing an environmental coupling we can't replicate in this room. Could be resonance with the cabinet," Mara said. "Could be the stairwell acting like a column," Leah said. "Could be the universe eating its vegetables." She adjusted the thermostat upward 2 degrees. The cycle lengthened, dragging their interval. The onset aspirate lost its footing. "See," Leah said. "Tiny temperature drift resets the tone. It's obedient to physics." "Except when it isn't," Mara said. The words sounded like they belonged on a religion's pamphlet. They took the chamber apart to document the cuts before melt blurred the evidence. Mara photographed each groove with a macro lens, scaled them with a stamped ruler, then bagged slivers of ice like shards of a window nobody believed existed. By the time they were done, meltwater ran into the tray in clean, sorrowing streams. Leah removed the back panel of the test chamber to show the insulation. "We'll try to fake the handprint," she said, and pressed her palm hard into the foam, then replaced the panel and let the unit run. A minute later, she pulled the thermal again. A formless blot warmed where her hand had been, then faded like a shy ghost. Nothing like the clean-splayed, 5-fingered heat shape they had seen in 3B. "Transfer decays too fast," she said. "Your print lives because something channels heat to it longer than plastic should. Pocket, cavity, or, I hate to say it, our field reading was contaminated." Mara considered the way the ice had built itself around the wounds in the original fridge. "We'll see what the panel tells us," she said. The evidence techs had been careful. When the crew wheeled the 3B refrigerator into the lab, it looked like a hospital patient arriving for a procedure in a room where the doctors couldn't afford new machines. They set it on a dolly under the hood, bagged its power cord like in 4, and stepped back. "Chain of custody intact," the tech said. "Back panel untouched. Your handprint's still there, if you believe in handprints." Leah filmed the removal, screws counted aloud. Panel eased off in a single motion like the lid of a coffin. Behind it, the insulation weighted, yellowed foam. And there, where the test chamber had given them a blot, the Weiss's unit offered a formal shape. 5 elongated thermal petals, wrist narrowed, heat diffused but still present. "It's inverted," Leah said, swallowing. "As if the warmer thing is on the far side of the foam, pushing toward us." "Neighboring cavity?" Mara asked. Leah traced the cavity map she had already made. "No cavity there. The intake's here. The compressor's here. The only there beyond this panel is the outer shell, a sheet of metal, and then..." She rapped her knuckles. "Air. Could be trapped heat from a fan," the tech offered, correct and unhelpful. "Bag the panel," Mara said. "We look for residues." They photographed the print until the camera's metadata yawned. They Q-tipped the foam for anything that was not foam. They catalogued a pocket of air that persisted like a held breath between layers of insulation. In the belly of the unit, a gloved hand found a smudge of clear residue beneath a ridge where frost had once grown. Marta, the other tech, quick and watchful, lifted the smear with a sterile swab. "Plasticizer," she said. "Or skin oil. We'll know in an hour," Leah said. Her voice had sharpened the way voices do when a laugh would be dangerous. The forensic report hustled where others dawdled. Surface residues, plasticizers, trace salt, minute hemoglobin well below what anyone could call blood. In the narrow duct by the intake, under a rind of ice a tech had coaxed away like a jeweler. A latently preserved fingerprint rode the plastic. A partial whirl, 3 clean points. Leah lifted it with gel and transferred it to a slab like a butterfly wing. The database chewed and came up with the obvious. "Yelena," Mara said. The hit glowed on the monitor with the serenity of numbers behaving. "Match probability high. Freeze layer depth dating it to 10 to 12 days. Which puts her here after the electricity was cut," Leah said. "Which we knew," Mara said, though knowing and seeing are different animals. She let the fact stand and move air around the room. "She opened the inner casing?" Leah pointed to the bead lines on the compressor and at the screw heads with marred paint. "Somebody did." She touched beneath the ice. "Could be when the layer was thin enough to work." Mara set her palms on the dolly's handles as if at a hospital bed, and looked at the knit square they had bagged from the inner cavity, a pocket of pattern stiff with rhyme. They had found it when Leah, swearing softly, had wormed a hand into a narrow service aperture and dislodged something that did not belong. On the bench, the square looked like fabric in the act of remembering fur. As we've channeled air the way reeds channel river. When Leah breathed across it, it spoke. A small, private tone no fan had been taught. "Two sources," Leah said, not triumphantly. "Machine vowel, human consonant or artifact that behaves like one." Mara closed her eyes and replayed the neighbor's clip with the broken hymn in it. Overlaid it with the lab tone. Overlaid both with the sound of air teasing the knit square. "The world likes to make chords when you are unprepared." She opened her eyes. "If Yelena touched the casing 10 to 12 days ago," she said, "and there are no footprints in dust, and no camera sees her leave, where is she?" "Cold rooms hold their own answers," Leah said, "and their own dead ends." Mara nodded toward the logboard. "Write up the reconstruction. Every cut, every interval. File the spectrogram overlay with the note about the overtone we couldn't reproduce. Include the line about temperature drift resetting the tone." Leah clicked her pen, already obedient to the bureaucracy that turns wonder into paper. "And the print. I'll have CSU expand their sweep of the building," Mara said. "Chute, crawl space, vents, stairwell. But we go where the grief would go next." Leah glanced at the knit square, at the handprint shape cooling in the foam, at the intake that continued to hum though no wire confessed to feeding it. "Where's that?" "Colder," Mara said. In the corridor, the precinct's radiator woke and clicked. Small metal noises like a body turning over in sleep. Mara set her recorder on the bench and let it count one more interval. At 31 seconds, something in the room tried to decide if it would speak and then changed its mind. The parish hall was warm in the way rooms are when cheap radiators overperform out of pride. Chairs in a circle, a kettle that had boiled itself into a white ring on the steel. Flyers for grief groups printed in fonts that tried not to make promises. Mara stood at the doorway long enough to let the smell assemble itself. Tea while coats thawing, a thread of incense from the church proper, and then knocked on the frame as if on a patient. Sister Amelie raised her head. She wore the practical cardigan of a woman who had learned to make warmth portable. Her face had done the work of listening for so long that it had forgotten any other posture. "Detective," she said, already positioning a spare chair where it would not become an interview but could not help it. "You asked about Yelena." The circle was empty for the hour. The sister gestured to sit. On the wall behind her, laminated cards held phrases people could borrow when their own mouths were bankrupt. "I don't know how to answer that. I hear you. I am also angry." Beneath them, a box of tissues that never ran out in time. "She came after the stillbirth," Sister Amelie said. 2 years ago." Some women speak in torrents. She spoke like a person who has been told her words are rationed. But when she did, the sister placed two fingers together as if pinching thread. Pure line, no knots. What did she say? Mara asked. That her nights had lengthened, Sister Amelie said. That silence had hands. She spread her own, palms up, a priesthood of nothing. She could not forgive the quiet for staying. Her husband, Aaron, came once, sat outside, there on the step. The sister nodded toward the entrance. He hummed, not words, a breath with a note in it. Moravian, old as kitchens. Mara slid an evidence photo across the table. 4 bars of music, blued by moisture. The sister's mouth made a small shape of recognition. Yes, she said, that hymn is a husk. The words go missing on purpose. It asks air to carry calm when throats are tired. She looked fierce, Mara said. At a lecture she attended binding songs. A good word, Sister Amelie said. She wanted to bind the nights so they wouldn't unravel. She said, I will cut the hours smaller until the voices fit. I told her voices are not obedient. She said obedience was not the point. Containment was. The kettle clicked itself dead. The sister poured without asking because asking makes some people feel obliged. Do you have children, detective? No, Mara said. I inventory other people's missing. A rhinus. Then the sister's face returned to the rosary of facts. A month ago she came with a line burned across her thumb. She took a pen and drew an invisible stripe along her own skin, from pad to joint. White, not a cut, a frostburn. I know the look. Freezers in our pantry do that when the door sticks and volunteers get impatient. She laughed when I fussed. She said, the ice listens better. Did she mention adoption? Mara asked. She wanted it the way hungry people want soup, Sister Amelie said. With shame for wanting, the file stalled. I wrote a letter, her mouth pinched, which did what such letters do. We saw the reason code, Mara said. Neonatal loss unresolved. Noise complaints. Noise, the sister said softly. Yes, she made music where others did not want to hear it. She sang at hours not respectful of apartments. People mistake lullabies for indulgence. They forget it is a form of work. Mara placed her phone on the table between them. 2 nights before they disappeared, she said. We recovered a voicemail you received. She pressed play. Aaron's voice came through the tinny speaker, rubbed raw from sleeplessness. When it cries back, he said, with the careful precision of a man assembling belief, asterisk she sleeps. I'll finish the last set tonight. Asterisk the recorded air hissed for a second. Then the line died. Sister Amelie listened without moving. He loved her very much, she said. Sometimes love makes accomplices. Did she ever speak about other rooms? Mara asked. Cold rooms. Places she visited. The hospital, the sister said. She volunteered a while in a neonatal wing. After the stillbirth, I told her it was unwise. She said she needed to learn how machines hum when they are allowed to help. The sister hesitated, then added, there is a private clinic, was I think in Seefeld, closed. She walked past it on purpose once a week. She said the smell of old air kept her company. Mara pictured the derelict basement she hadn't yet seen, the unlit corridors that learned the names of those who came alone. Did she ever use the word bind? Not allowed, the sister said. But she tied everything. String on jars, knots on shawls. If she had been born in a different century, she would have embroidered prayers into hymns. We have only plastic now. Some of us carve plastic. The church next door chimed the hour. The sound came through the wall like a neighbor who didn't know how loud his shoes were. Sister Amelie folded her hands around the warm cup. Detective, she said, sometimes grief tries to make meaning and it succeeds. Then we don't know whether to be grateful or afraid. Both is cheaper than regret, Mara said and stood. Thank you. At the door, the sister touched her sleeve. If you find her, alive or otherwise. She did not finish the sentence. Some professions do not get to say please. The adoption file, once you knew what to ask for, surrendered its unsentimental numbers. A neighbor complaint had indeed tripped a flag. Lullaby at irregular hours, volume sufficient to disturb. Under that, a social worker's note, home visit delayed pending noise mitigation. There were metrics for everything except the shape of a missing mouth in a dark room. On the tram back to the precinct, the windows reflected the city's clean self back at itself. Riverside lights in obedient rows. Couples with winter hands finding each other at stops. Mara watched without letting any of it into her inventory. When her phone buzzed, it vibrated a warning she already knew. Redo dubs. Asterisk, you asked if I did other things. I cleaned pantry this morning. Found salt circles in the corner. And a bucket with thawed brine. Thought you should see. Asterisk. She called him without text preface. Don't touch anything else, she said. Photograph. I'm on my way. I didn't touch, Redo said. He lowered his voice as if the walls would tell on him. Detective, I should say, I turned off the breaker. Weeks ago. I swear. I turned it off. I know, Mara said. We both know what it means that the fridge doesn't. Stay put. She hung up and stared at the tram's advertisement for a holiday that promised warm beaches to people with incomes she didn't share. Salt circles. Brine. An old folk logic wearing a lab coat. Corrode the gasket, etch deeper. Teach the door to hold a line. Ritual as engineering. Engineering as ritual. The categories were for paperwork. The hand on the knife did not observe the distinction. At the flat, CSU had already cordoned the pantry with tape that glowed faintly in the penlight like a halo with a day job. The salt lay in 2 rings, one inside the other, with a scuffed gap as if someone had stepped in or out and then regretted the footprint. The bucket of brine had thawed and sweated on the tile, leaving a ring that remembered an intention. The air tasted like pickle jars in August and something beside it, like a faint, metallic hymn. Photograph, Mara said. The flash did the ugly work of truth. Reto hovered in the doorway like a man who had run out of places to put his hands. Why salt? He asked, genuine. I thought that was for roads. It's for everything, Mara said. Preservation, purity, etching, binding. She crouched and tipped the bucket with a gloved finger. The meniscus trembled and set. On the wall nearest the floor, chalk arrows had been drawn and partly wiped, as if someone had practiced a diagram until the lines could live elsewhere. Leah arrived in her parka, breath quick from stairs. She knelt, sniffed the brine, dipped a strip. Salt and vinegar, she said. Accelerates corrosion on cheaper gaskets. Etches plastic when you refreeze. Old trick for making grooves bite deeper. And look, she pointed to the hinge side of the door. Lithium pack. It was nested under the compressor housing, wrapped in black tape like a secret too ashamed of itself to show its label. Leah lifted it carefully with 2 fingers. A thin wire ran into the housing, sutured into a place no user was meant to reach. Trickle-powering auxiliary fans, she said. You get hours to days depending on draw. They got 2 weeks out of this if careful. Facilities says the breaker's off, the meter's dead, Mara said. So what feeds the rest? Reto cleared his throat. He had the look of a man about to confess to a stupid but not malicious sin. Old doorbell circuit, he said. The buildings from the 60s. Some of the commons wiring is creative. He asked me once how the bells work. I told him, there's a transformer on the landing for the chime. Low voltage. If you knew where to bite the wire, you could borrow. Parasite the chime, Leah said. So when neighbors buzz at night, voltage surges. The interval shifts. Your cry learns new lengths. Reto nodded miserably. I didn't help with that. He did. I used his cash to buy decent wire cutters, that's all. Mara rose. The pantry smelled of brine and intent. The chalk plan on the wall had been partly wiped but not well. Arrows curved toward the refrigerator as if the room had forgiven it a circle ritual needs. On the back of the compressor plate, someone had scratched 4 bars of the same minor hymn the neighbor had kept hearing. Music as instruction. Music as a manual. Leah ran her fingers along the gasket with the delicacy of a surgeon who refuses to admit affection. If you want the intake to behave like a reed, she said, you want these grooves deep and narrow. Salt and freeze, until the plastic thinks it was always this shape. Redo hovered, remorse making his legs heavy. They left, detective, he said. They both left. I swear I saw them leave. You saw them leave once, Mara said. I will not accuse your eyes of more. She stepped back into the kitchen proper. The refrigerator hummed as if it had never required permission. Somewhere in the building, a neighbor pressed a door buzzer for a visitor. The cry in Mara's head extended itself a fraction longer on the memory of 31 seconds. She pocketed her phone. The message to herself was unnecessary, but she sent it anyway. Power source accounted for. Ritual redefined as circuit. Proceed to colder rooms. Asterisk. They pulled the refrigerator like a reluctant altar from its corner and found what corners always keep. Lint like gray moss, a bottle cap that had rolled into retirement, and hair. A few strands had knit themselves into a miniature rope along the warmest seam. Marta teased them free with tweezers, the gesture precise as embroidery. 2 colors, she said. Brown and lighter, sun-faded? Bag both, Mara said. One will be hers. One will tell us who moved the altar. The lithium pack sat on the counter in an evidence box, taped like a confession. Leah had clipped a meter onto its leads. The display blinked a tired number. Down to fumes, she said. They eked this along, trickled the fans by night, maybe topped it once with a fresh pack. It's almost done. Then the cry should starve, the patrolman said, hopeful as a child bargaining with bedtime. It should, Leah said. Mara crouched at the skirting board where chalk arrows ghosted the wall. The plan was half-wiped, but intention doesn't erase. Arrows for airflow, small clusters labeled in a hand that did not admit doubt. Bind, hush, keep warm. The irony of the last made the room colder. Where does this go? Mara asked, thumbing the wall at a neat square that was not neat enough to be factory. Redo shifted, then surrendered. There's a service vent behind. Runs into the stairwell shaft. Not official. You see a lot of not official in buildings that survived 5 owners. Show me. They removed a papered-over grill with a paint-sealed screw that agreed to move only because persistence is a kind of prayer. Behind it, a slender rectangle cut into old plaster opened on dark. Cold breathed there, unbothered by the room's staging. Leah fed a borescope into the slot. The fiber optic showed a narrow throat, dust without prints, then the soft slope into the stairwell air column. Outside mic, Mara said. They taped a sensitive microphone to a thin cable and let it drop into the shaft until the acoustic graph told them it had found the air's patience. Leah switched her laptop to a 2-channel display. One for the kitchen, one for the stairwell void. They waited while the unit hummed and the house thought. At 31 seconds, a cry unspooled in the kitchen, thin and obedient to its promise. On the 2nd channel, nothing but the faint rush of building breath. Only heard from inside, Leah said. This is a room engine. The vent's not broadcasting a ghost. So the ritual was never a performance, Mara said. It was containment. Redo's voice came from the doorway, small under his hat. She told the air to keep it in, he said, then flinched, as if hearing himself had broken a rule. Mara kept her eyes on the graph. You saw them leave, she said, a statement to keep him steady. Yes, he swallowed. He carried the tool bag. She had the blanket. I went down and checked the breaker after. I turned it off again because it made me feel like I was helping. Marta returned with a tray, hairs in packets, a mug ring lifted from the counter with a gelatin sheet. Mug's old, she said, but there's residue in the ring. In the lab, chemistry did what belief asked of it. The report came quickly, as if the machines wanted to be useful. The lighter hair matched Aaron's profile from a brush in a bag of seized belongings. The brown carried Yelena's mitochondrial whisper. The mug ring held trace Zopiclone, sleep medication, enough to have been sipped, not spilled. Someone drugged themselves to get through nights of silence, Leah said, or to stand guard while a machine sang. Mara nodded toward the open carcass of the refrigerator. Look at the backplate. Marta had already wiped the soot of the world from it with a dry cloth and angled the light. Scratched in with a patience that had no other outlet. For bars of the minor hymn, not notes but intervals marching like a calm heartbeat. Music engraved as a reminder for metal that never learned to read. Instruction, Mara said. If power is an appetite, music is a diet. She took the borescope again and wormed it along the refrigerator's wiring harness, the camera's snake eye showing insides that were never meant to be seen. A jumper wire bit the insulation at the cord's root, ran along the base and out through a drilled eyelet to the wall where the old doorbell conduit hid. Parasitic feed confirmed, she said. Low-voltage transformer on the landing. They turned visitors into power. I didn't help with that, Reto said, as if the admission changed gravity. You helped re-level the unit, Mara said, non-judgment as sharp as any knife. For resonance. Reto reddened. I told him it was stupid. He said tone changes with angle. He was right. I hate that he was right. Leah glanced at the meter again. The lithium pack's digits had staggered down another notch. She tipped the unit's door open with 2 fingers. The knit square, bagged and tagged, lay on the bench like a moth without a tree. She held the bag to her lips and exhaled gently across the weave. The square whispered back, a secret syllable lower than the lab tone had earned. Even when we take away the power, she said, the pattern answers air. On the spectrogram display, the room's hum continued to draw its band. 31 seconds turned like a slow coin in space and fell again. The cry came, a little raspier, as if the machine had acquired a cold. It's draining, Leah said softly. They put the refrigerator back just enough that it could pretend it still belonged to the wall. Reto fetched a level and slid it under the front feet. The bubble sat dead center, well taught. Don't touch the jumper, Mara said. I want a photo of the chime transformer at the landing. She sent the patrolman out with his phone. He returned with a shot of the small metal box behind a grill, paint thick from decades of landlords, wires spliced with the optimism of old men who had once been young. Do you ever get used to the way people make sanctuaries out of whatever is at hand? Leah asked. No, Mara said, and I don't want to. Her recorder on the counter pulsed its little green heart. She checked its log. Each cry had marked itself with obedient timestamps. Each interval agreed to be what memory wanted. She scrolled back to the earliest capture and compared shapes. The most recent cry wore a new tremor, an elongation at the tail, as if it were learning to fail. Let's take a walk, she said to Reto. Show me everything you touched. In the stairwell, in the cellar, in the crawl spaces you weren't supposed to know about. He hesitated, then nodded. I am not trying to be a story, he said. Then don't add chapters, Mara said. They worked the building like a lock testing pins. The stairwell's chill rose with its own logic. Cigarettes had taught it bitterness. A neighbor had once spilled soup and the smell had kept a tenancy. At the first landing, behind a cracked tile, a maintenance hatch big enough for a cat grinned. Reto's screwdriver pried it, and sometimes that is the whole job. Inside, dust and a single footprint. A toe, then nothing, as if someone had crouched and rethought escape. No hair, no fibers. A candy wrapper that had waited long enough to become archaeology. The vent channel they had traced from the kitchen opened here, a rectangle in the wall like a paused breath. Mara held her hand near it. The air was a degree colder, a kind of arithmetic the skin can do without math. Set your outside mic here, she told Leah. They taped and tested. The graph stayed unbothered. Whatever spoke only to the kitchen. In the cellar, the building's concrete soul collected damp as if it were owed. Lines of old heating pipes ran like sentences nobody had diagrammed in years. A door-marked cellar led to storage cubbies in chain link, each a little museum of batteries, strollers, useless lamps. Reto handed over his ring. The padlock to the Weiss's cubby opened with a cluck that had seen too many winters. Inside, a box of Christmas lights, a stack of folded moving blankets, a spool of thin wire. Same insulation as the jumper, Leah said. Not illegal to own wire, Reto muttered. Illegal to be haunted, Mara said dryly. We're all in trouble. By the time they returned to 3B, the lithium pack read lower than civility. Leah unplugged it from the test clip and set the evidence box lid back as if tucking a child. Minutes, she said. Maybe. Then we'll see what belongs to engineering, Mara said. And what doesn't. They stood in a room that had been tidied into absence. The pantry's salt circles glared like chalk drawn by a sober hand. The chalk plan's arrows had bled where the bucket had bumped them. The refrigerator breathed its small winter into a building that insisted on order. The patrolman checked his watch because he couldn't bear not to. Reto stared at the doorframe as if there were answers carved there too. 31 seconds. The cry tried to stand and stumbled. A ragged onset, then a shape, then a tail that scattered itself like beads on a hard floor. Again. Leah whispered to no one and to the room. 31 seconds. The hum flexed. A faint flutter in the high frequencies suggested a fan somewhere giving up. The cry came thinner without its body. The knit square on the bench, though bagged, rode the room's air and sighed an answer that did not register until you wanted it to. Lee's meter on the lithium box dimmed and steadied and finally flattened into a polite, unhelpful 0. Dead, she said. The hum didn't die. It sagged and corrected and found a new equilibrium like a very old singer finding a different key to keep the song. Mara felt the set of her shoulders change, the body's little acknowledgement that the rules had got smaller. Doorbell transformers still live, the patrolman offered, clinging to the wire like a floating door in a cold sea. It can't be carrying this, Leah said. Not without the pack. Not without the fans. Mara stepped to the refrigerator and rested her gloved palm to the enamel skin. It vibrated under her hand like a body refusing to give up a cough. If this is only what we built, she said, it will end in a few hours when the chime's leakage loses heart. If it doesn't, Leah said, we go somewhere colder. Mara glanced at the evidence sleeve where Yelena's bracelet photo sat like a coin rubbed for luck. The engraved angles winked up at her. Not purely runes, not purely anything. We go now, she said, before the city wakes and the stairwell fills with people who don't want to know what their building can hold. Reto started to ask where. Mara was already dialing the number she had filed under Seefeld. Private clinic. Outside, the river laid its order over the dark. Inside, the house counted one more interval, then another. The lithium pack lay quiet, having confessed all it could. The doorbell transformer hummed on the landing, a tiny choir still willing to sing. The number listed for the Seefeld clinic rang into a recorded sigh. A woman's voice from a decade ago promising business hours that no longer existed. Mara listened to it twice as if a new meaning might have been edited in between rings. Nothing. She ended the call and looked at the clock on her phone. 1:14. We don't get colder by phone, she said. We sit with the thing we can reach. They set up a stakeout the way you set a bone. Slowly, with a care the patient will not appreciate until morning. Leah took the flat above. Ceiling microphones slipped through a heating grate with a surgical thread. Marta hid a pinhole camera behind the dead ivy on the balcony rail facing 3BS lightless window. Mara sat in the Weiss's living room with the refrigerator's hum growing the room around it, a soft body assembling ribs. Reto stood in the doorway like an apology that had grown taller than its host. You want me to go, he said, eyes on the floorboards. I want you to tell me the truth while you're still in practice, Mara said. After that, yes. He took off his beanie and twisted it, then ashamed, put it back on. I helped him lift it, he said, the words finding their own slope. Releveled. Tiny shims. We tested with a phone app tuner. You can hear the tone tighten when you get the angle right. He said it mattered for the vowel. How many shims? Mara asked. 3. He blinked. 4. The last was paper. We taped it so it wouldn't creep. You turned the breaker off. I did, he said quickly. He paid me, I left, I turned it off. Then I went back 2 days later and cleaned the pantry. The landlord fines for salt on tile. It eats grout. I didn't want them to have that on top of... He ran out of nouns and let the world fill in. You ran the jumper to the doorbell circuit. Mara said. He flinched as if the room had slapped him. No. He asked me how it was wired. I told him. I touched nothing. Not that. Then you know enough to show me where it bites, she said. He swallowed and gave her a key no one had authorized him to own. In the stairwell, under a metal cover shaped like a concession, a transformer sat humming the meek hum of devices that never expected to be famous. The braided wire, neatly taped, slid under the lip and disappeared into plaster. He was careful, Redo said. He had clean hands for dirty work. Back in the flat, they settled into the rhythm of the interval. The recorder on the counter ticked timestamps too quietly to feel useful. At 0:31 past the minute, the cry came, thinner now, the lithium pack's ghost influence dwindling. On the second cycle it lengthened, the vowel stretching like a mouth about to form a consonant and refusing permission. Lee's whisper reached down through the grate. Upper Mike hears nothing the kitchen doesn't, she said. It's local. The stairwell channel is flat. If there's a second source, it's in there with you. Comforting, Mara said to the room. Outside, the building argued with the river over which one knew more about cold. The limb mat, always winning that conversation, slid along its bed, making its small legal sounds. Cameras did not sleep. Phones did not lie, provided you only asked the questions they were built for. Mara pulled up the municipal clip again. 2:11 3 nights ago, Aaron on the river path with a tool bag, Redo falling in step, the two of them absorbed by the city's indifferent circuitry. She lifted the screen to show him. He looked, and his face changed around a place the beanie could not cover. I went with him to carry, he said. We moved the thing to sit again. He held up his hands, palms out. He told me they were leaving. He swore he'd be back for it in the morning. He said the last set would sing without him. What did you believe? Mara asked. That people leave, he said. They watched the wall clock climb patience. At 2:07, a neighbor buzzed the door to let in a delivery. One of those night couriers who bring sugar to people who cannot sleep without projects. The doorbell transformer hummed louder for a second, fed the parasitic line a lick of voltage. The refrigerator's hum brightened as if someone had turned a dimmer the width of a hair. The cry that followed was not the cry they knew. It rose on its practiced vowel and then found a second shape riding its back. A brief attempt at a consonant that did not yet trust its consonantness. Ma. It tried, failing the closing, a mouth forming the first half of a mother and then refusing to complete the crime. Lee's intake of breath popped softly on Mara's earpiece. You heard that, she said. I heard you hear me hear it, Mara said, and only then realized she had leaned forward in her chair as if leaning toward a bassinet. Marta replayed the capture and stretched the onset. On her graph, the usual laminar band wore a new ruffle, a human overtone clinging like lace. Leah plotted it against their lab spectrogram and typed a note she did not read aloud. Non-instrumental harmonic present. The next interval came and failed its imitation of the first, as if embarrassed by having attempted speech. The refrigerator vibrated under the enamel like a thing building a spine. Redo took a step back and put his knuckles gently against the door jamb the way superstitious men touch stone. Stay, Mara said. If you leave, I'll have to find you again. He nodded. His eyes had the shine people's eyes get when they are staring into rooms that are not present. At 2:31, between one breath and the next, the kitchen light, dead since the entry, blinked. Not illumination. An eyelid's flinch. Leah swore up the vent. No supply, she whispered. I want to fight this building with a wrench. The glow came not from the fixture but from the rectangle of frost inside the refrigerator's door gasket, where the ice had taken on a white that was not whiteness but a softer way of holding light. Shadows play in frosting. They teach cops not to trust themselves. Still, behind the frosted inner panel the shape shifted, a shallow gradient thickening where thickness should not be. Mara stood, slow as if standing faster might make the shape go polite. She put her hand to the enamel and felt the hum step across her glove into her bones. We're not playing, she said quietly to the metal. Not tonight. At 2:33, her phone trembled in her pocket. A text from Gans, the hour acknowledging his complicity. Asterisk, you asked what is colder than a kitchen. There's a private clinic off Duferstrasse. Basement cold rooms. Closed since 2018. They were used for storage after. Then nothing. Security contractor friend says the backup power cycles every few days to keep lines from freezing. Asterisk. Copy, she wrote back. Name, he sent a pin and a photo. A low concrete building with a smile that knew better than to open wide. Rosenfeld Privat Clinic. The picture had been taken on a day when the sky was a bureaucracy. She looked at Reto, then at the clock, then at the refrigerator, which had decided to behave the way animals do when a vet walks back into the room. We go now, she said. Marta, keep the lens. Leah, leave the recorders running. Reto. I am not going to a clinic, he said too quickly. You're not, Mara agreed. You're going to stay here and not save anyone. If the cry changes shape, you will not call it a miracle. You will text me the timestamp and the number of seconds and whether the doorbell rang first. You will not open anything. You trust me, he said, as if it were an accusation. I trust the fear you're feeling, she said. It's almost the right size. Don't waste it. She and Leah took the stairs. The stairwell smelled like metal warmed by hands. On the landing, the transformer hummed steadily, good at being uninteresting. Outside, the river lay where they had left it. A courier van moved like a decision through the next street and was gone. As Mara unlocked the unmarked car, Leah wrapped her scarf higher and blew into her fists. You think he knows more than he said, she murmured. He knows what he can survive knowing, Mara said. The rest is for rooms. They drove toward Seefeld on streets that remembered being trams before cars convinced them otherwise. Lake air pushed in from the dark and reorganized the cold so that it felt older. Gans's pin guided them through a grid of residential politeness until the buildings grew less interested in performing comfort. Rosenfeld Privat Clinic appeared exactly where a tired faith healer would set up shop, on a corner that had once been respectable enough to keep secrets. Backup power? Leah asked, checking the time. He says it cycles every few days. 3 nights ago, Mara said. That's when our cry grew a human overtone. Leah parked in the shadow of a sign that had forgotten the word emergency and remembered only the color. They sat for a moment with the engine ticking itself into silence, a machine cooling after having pretended to be brave. In the rearview mirror, the city's arranged lights looked like a thing that could be convinced to listen. Torch, Mara said. Leah passed one over. We're going to break a law, she said. We already did, Mara said. We listened. They crossed the empty forecourt. The clinic's glass doors, decently locked, reflected 2 women dressed in their jobs. Inside, a security light held its breath. A side gate had accepted rust months ago and never renegotiated. Lee's pick whispered to it a 3-note song. The lock agreed to remember that people exist. They slipped through and found the stairs that led down into the rooms where Winter stayed. The air changed at the first turn, the way air changes when it meets stone long enough to learn patience. Behind them, somewhere along Duferstrasse, a door buzzer rang for someone's guest. In 3B, a kitchen waited for 31 seconds to oblige. In the Rosenfeld basement, the darkness lifted its head as if it had been called by name. The basement corridor had the careful quiet of a place that used to mean well. Paint peeled in verticals like falling snow. A framed evacuation plan hung crooked, its arrow pointing to exits that believed in a different decade. The floor sloped barely toward the drains. Your ankles learned it first. Somewhere distant, a sump pump argued with time. Leah killed her torch twice and with it her breath. Each time the dark came back as if delighted to have the room to itself. Power ghost, she whispered, showing the beam low. Emergency fixtures with their guts removed, sockets capped with orange tape, a row of wall outlets crusted with tape that had yellowed into archaeology. Backup cycles, Mara said, listening, not with her ears exactly, but with the part of her that had been taught to hear which rooms wanted company. We're here in the trough. They found the cold rooms by the way the air grew ungenerous. Door after door with gasket frames, steel pulls pitted by use. KHLRUM1 in a stenciled font that didn't believe fonts could be kind. The first door stuck. Leah leaned her weight, and Seal gave up with a sigh that put frost in Mara's teeth. Their torchlight found stainless walls, wire racks, a floor drain with a rust halo like an old saint. Empty. No hum. The quiet had been eating well. Next, Mara said. Kichalarium-2 had been repurposed badly and then abandoned thoroughly. Boxes labeled in black marker, asterisk paperwork asterisk, gloves, calcium, a wheeled gurney with its mattress rolled like a confession, a portable freezer the size of a coffin parked against the far wall. His cable snaked to an outlet that shouldn't have worked. It didn't. The LED was dark, but someone had wanted it to once. Leah stepped ahead, shoulders forward, the way she met bulky machinery with politeness first. Listen, she said. The room did not whisper. It remembered. The gurney wore a film of dust that had collected along the rails in furry beads. On the portable unit, the compressor housing had been opened and closed again. The same solder crescent severance tools left, the same impatience visible in the bead. The intake throat wore a polymer baffle wedged where no manufacturer intended. Zip ties trimmed to a neat chastity. Along the inner lip, under frost grown and melted and grown again, shallow grooves had been cut with a hand that had had practice. Mara's torch found a smear above the intake, brown gone brown-gray in cold air. The color blood turns when it has learned to wait. She took a swab and the swab took it, greedy and neat. A sound rose from the corner that wasn't machinery. A human sound made small by a large room. Lee's torch snapped to the gurney. A man lay on it wrapped in 2 moving blankets that had failed retirement, boots still on, hands bare. His nails were the pale of a person lately acquainted with winter from the inside. His lips shaped a tone too soft to be speech and too persistent to be delirium. The knit at his throat was familiar, the pattern the square had taught them. He had pulled a piece of blanket into a small channel and, half-conscious, was breathing through it like a reed. "Aaron," Mara said softly and then louder. His eyes opened on her with the way eyes open in rooms that have never been kind. A flinch, then a ride back to recognition. He tried to sit up and discovered his hands. They shook. "Don't," Leah said, already shrugging out of her coat to make a better blanket. The body's priesthood kicking in where jurisprudence would take 15 minutes. She checked his skin with the back of her knuckles. Cold, but not the dangerous glossy kind. Hypothermic in the slow way. He latched onto the detective's sleeve with a grip too weak to hold but too sincere to dismiss. "I finished the set," he said, in a voice that had been grinding on the same gear for too long. "It needed the vowel," she said. "It needed the vowel." "Where is Yelena?" Mara asked. He smiled, the wrong expression, because he was answering a different question. "She taught it to speak," he said. "Not to us, to the cold." Lee's eyes cut to Mara. Mara nodded to the door. "Ambulance," she said. Leah didn't argue. She sprinted up the corridor for a signal and came back with the confirmation tone people have learned to read as salvation. Mara took the torch around the room's edges while Aaron worked at breathing. The floor drain was the old kind with a threaded plug. The threads wore a shine where something had worried at them. She crouched, sniffed without breathing, and saw the telltale of hair. A few long strands like lines of script tangled with a bead of ice the size of a thumbnail. She teased the hair free and the ice came with it. A braidlet frozen into the drain's mouth. "Bag," she said. Marta wasn't there. Leah was down the corridor. She made do. Evidence envelope, gloved fingers, patience. The braidlet came away whole, ice gloving it like a reliquary. Runes didn't belong in this shape, but there they were. Angles etched into the tiny beads of frost along the hair's length, as if someone had worried letters into the world with the only medium left to them. Her torch found the wall above the portable unit, scratched there in uneven gouges. If air can hold can air hold a name? Beneath it, a series of Yelena S carved into the paint in a column, as if names could be stacked until height changed physics. The door buzzer in some outer world rang, a pulse the room did not care about. The generator, for there was one somewhere, chose that moment to flutter awake. The emergency fixtures blinked a softer light into life. The portable unit stayed dead. The wall outlet wore tape like a gag. The hum in the room belonged entirely to human lungs. On a work table, someone had left a bracelet, a thin metal band with angles engraved into it in a hand that had learned them as decoration before it learned them as letters. Mara lifted it with the sleeve of her glove and turned it under the light. The angles caught like fishing hooks. "Yelena's," she said, to the room that already knew. By the door, a maintenance clipboard hung from a nail, pages curled. Mara peeled one back with a delicacy the place rewarded. Backup run tick boxes marched down the page beside dates. The most recent read power cycle. 3 days and then a scrawl in a different hand. Stabilizer test. Pass. A timestamp. 00:30. The same night their kitchen cry had grown a second shape. She photographed the page and the nail shadow underneath, because one day a board defense will ask if she can prove which page was on top when the ink dried. She can. That's what the shadow is for. Leah came back with paramedics who looked offended at the cold and polite toward the law. They bundled Aaron into competence. Foil, oxygen, questions. "We'll take him to the university hospital," the taller one said. "He's answering. No frostbite. Lucky." "He rehearsed luck," Mara said. "He earned some." Aaron, buoyed by the competence, found the thread of the hymn again. He hummed the cradle skein under the oxygen mask, the sound of breath taught to remember where to go. "I'll finish," he said, and maybe he meant his sentence, maybe the grooves, maybe the part of his thinking where he did the math of guilt. The stretcher wheels spoke in a language the room used to know. Turning, gone. When the door had swallowed the paramedics and there could be sirens and the building remembered its emptiness, Mara stood over the portable unit and put her palm to its dead shell. No hum met her. The grooves inside were precise, as at 3B. The knit fibers caught in the lip had been worried into channels like reeds. Someone had loved this machine into a job it was not designed to hold. "Look," Leah said quietly. Mara followed her torch. On the concrete near the far corner, feet had written a story where dust stopped and cold took notes. A bare footprint, small heel, ball toes, and then a smear from the ball forward. Not a stride. Pivot. Knees had met floor. Both palms had pressed. One hand's print trailed a longer finger, as if the glove had been too big. The other print showed the lilt of a thumb that had known frostburn. Then nothing. After the palms, the dust resumed, and the concrete's memory refused to cooperate. 2 days, maybe 3, Leah said. Older than today, newer than the room. They searched the cold room as you search a chapel when you don't know the hymnal, with humility and an ear for echoes. No body, no blanket, no hair aside from what the drain had guarded like an idiot reliquary. The walls said what walls say, * some of us were given jobs. We did them. Then they changed the rules and we kept doing them anyway. * on the way out, Mara took the maintenance clipboard. The nail made a tiny scream against the wood. No one came to object. In the corridor, the lights guttered once and held. The backup cycle had decided it could show off without rupturing itself. Leah frowned at the panel by the door. Power flicker 3 nights ago, 0:30, she said, reading the log into her phone like a spell. Your kitchen learned a new overtone the same minute. The world shouldn't link this many rooms. And yet, Mara said, on the stair up, the air lost its old bone quality and remembered skin. Outside, Lake Zurich had traded one darkness for another. The horizon was a thin seam of graphite. Somewhere downtown, a tram made a bell for people who had arranged their mornings like proofs. Mara checked her watch and then the little green heart on her recorder. In 3B, if nothing had failed catastrophically, the interval would be about to turn. Leah unlocked the car and slid behind the wheel, hands shaking in the way hands do when they stop having a job. We have Aaron, she said. We have a bracelet. We have hair. We have runes that are not runes behaving as diagrams. We have a room that learned how to speak to another room once every 3 nights. She looked at Mara like a person who wants an adult to say the thing adults say when trains are delayed and disappointment is a kind of weather. What do we do with that? We decide what mercy costs, Mara said, and whether evidence can afford it. Leah made a small sound that might have been a laugh if it had more calories. And Yelena? Mara held up the maintenance sheet. If air can hold a name, she said, then the city is already saying it. We just have to decide if we answer. She texted the patrolman at 3B. Status? The reply came in less than a minute, either because he had been waiting to be needed or because the room had kept him awake. Asterisk interval held. Cry longer at 2:11. Doorbell buzz 2:07. Now thinner. Transformer hum constant. Asterisk. She tucked the braidlet bag in her coat as if it might lose its temperature. We go back, she said. We map the grooves to phonemes. We find the vowel Yelena kept out. Leah started the engine. The car woke like a creature snatched from sleep. And if the cry keeps speaking after we cut the jumper? Then we ask the cold what it thinks it's learned, Mara said. And we try not to teach it anything we can't take back. By the time they returned to 3B, dawn had begun arranging itself somewhere beyond the courtyard, a rumor of light rather than an argument. The room was as they had left it. Tape, markers, the refrigerator breathing its patient winter, the pantry's circles scolding the tile. The patrolman had found a way to sit without looking asleep. He stood when they came in, relief a little too loud in his body. Intervals held, he said. Doorbell buzz at 3:41 for a delivery. Cry lengthened again. Thank you, Mara said, and let him go somewhere without humming. Leah cleared the counter and taped butcher paper across it, then unrolled printouts like a gambler laying down a hand. Airflow diagrams, thermal stills, the runes and kitchen marks sketched from photos, a phonetic chart of consonant and vowel cavities drawn as abstract mouths. We've been reading these as letters, she said, tapping the incisions. Stop. Read them as ducting. A vowel is a shape. So is a freezer. They opened the refrigerator once more. With the inner lamp forever dead, the pen lights made the carved surfaces look like chalkboards seen underwater. Leah traced a finger just above the plastic, respecting the rule about not touching the patient. Intake here, shelf rails here. These grooves deepen toward the throat. Consonant chambers cut for onset. And here, she angled the light so the wet edges flashed. A set of shallow scoops where the door lip meets the bin ledges. HH chambers. Mara overlaid a transparency on the interior like a surgeon aligning an old scar with a new incision. The phonetic chart's stylized mouth, tongue positions, palate arches, sat over the refrigerator's throat in a way that felt indecent and right. If you want the vowel you open here and here, she said, tapping. If you want O, you round at the lip here. Her finger landed on an absence. A bare patch of plastic where frost had not been allowed to grow thick. A gap that did not match the logic of the other cuts. Missing cavity, Leah said. Deliberate. Everything else is fussed over. This is untouched. She glanced at the bench where the bagged knit square lay like a held breath. Or, she looked at Mara. In her face, the simple, terrible possibility. They didn't say it. They let the room hold it for them. Mara closed the door so the hum recommenced at full authority. She set her recorder where it could watch, then stood very still with her palm on the enamel. Listen for the cadence, she said. The hum, now that you knew its grammar, carried its own call and response. Compressor tone, call. A narrow HH onset, response. The vowel body, call again. And then, sometimes, something riding the tail that did not belong to plastic or pressure. Leah pointed to the live spectrogram. A second harmonic ferried on the main band, arriving late, like a person entering a room after the sentence has started. There, she said. Human overtone. Mara opened the inner panel, screws counted, video rolling, and peered into the cavity. The foam insulation was a shipwreck of careful violations. Behind the intake run, a narrow service slot gaped where a manufacturer had expected nothing larger than a wire to pass. Someone had widened it with patience. In the slot, something darker than foam sat wedged, glazed white by thin frost. Leah coaxed it with tweezers and a whisper. It refused. She eased a slim spatula behind and levered like a librarian retrieving a book that had fallen behind a shelf. It came free with a brittle sigh. A knitted square, not the one they had bagged earlier but its sibling. Same pattern, same yarn, edges stiff with ice. The weave, examined close, wasn't random warmth. Channels and ribs and planned porosity, a geometry of threads that taught air where to go. Along one edge, Mara saw where someone had pinched it between fingernail and plastic often enough to leave a small, dark stain in the wool. She did not decide what she wanted it to be. "Bag," she said, and Leah slid an evidence sleeve open. Before sealing, she exhaled gently across the square. It answered with a faint, private tone no appliance had earned. The spectrogram jumped, startled, then settled. "Vowel plug," Leah said. "If it sits in the slot, it completes the mouth. Take it out, the mouth can't form. Insert, remove, control." Yelena kept the vowel, Mara said, or she left it where only she could reach. On the inner panel, a patch of frost had sublimated thin enough to show a fresh etching beneath the skin. Leah angled the light. The lines came up like scripture through vellum. Not runes, letters. The hand could not do calligraphy in that posture, but it could manage an inscription. "If it cries, we will be forgiven." Neither woman spoke. The refrigerator hummed in their silence like a prayer mill. "Cut the jumper," Mara said. The patrolman, drafted back, took pliers to the parasitic wire at the wall and snipped with the practical sorrow of ending anything. The doorbell transformer on the landing kept its own song. This line would no longer drink from it. They waited. The room recalibrated in the ways machines do when you alter their theology. The hum dipped and recovered. 31 seconds revealed itself as less law than habit. It wandered, then found a new plateau. The spectrogram's main band slimmed. The next cry, if that was still the right word, rose thin, obedient to physics and nothing else. No overtone, no breathy onset, just the reed and the throat and the room. "Again," Mara said. The second cycle came and resembled the first, as things do when you have removed a complicated variable from an equation. The knit square on the bench, still bagged, sang a private syllable to itself, unheard by anyone who wasn't prepared to be accused of hearing it. Leah let out the breath she had apparently been saving since the clinic. "So it was layered," she said. "Transformer gave it a kick. The plug, the square, gave it a mouth. Humans supplied the rest." "Humans always supply the rest," Mara said. She looked at the missing cavity slot, at the frost where a finger had lived. She pictured the gesture. Remove the square, the cry retreats to vowel-less breath. Insert it, the house forms a mouth. Control. A way to sleep. A way to make the nights obey. "And when the human left," she said, "the house tried to remember. Evidence enough," Leah said softly. "We've mapped the ducks to phonemes. We have the plug. We have Aaron. Evidence is what the court needs," Mara said. "Mercy is what the room asked for." The patrolman cleared his throat as if to remind the universe he was still present. "What next?" Mara nodded toward the breaker box. "Kill the landing transformer," she said. "At the main." The patrolman hesitated. "You got a key?" "I can make a call," he said, and did. The building's bones protested with a low, offended silence when the chime's small hum died. Doors above would be answered by feet for a day. The city would survive. "Now we know," Leah said. "If it keeps going, it's not our wires." They stood in a room they had finally stripped of all the excuses it had been offered. The refrigerator carried on, a quieter body now, waiting for instructions it would no longer receive. 31 seconds became 32, then 30. The cry returned. A bare vowel, orphaned of its consonant, thinner than before and somehow more itself. The recorder marked the time. On its screen, the band of sound was a sketch now, a pencil line where ink had been. Leah rubbed her hands together, not for warmth, but to keep from choosing a conclusion too early. "What did Yelena keep out?" Mara said, half to the chart, half to the room. "Which vowel did she refuse the house?" Leah slid the transparency again, lining tongue positions with grooves, lip rounding with shelf rails, the knit square's ribs with the missing slot. "Asterisk a asterisk," she said. Or the open vowel. She left the open alone. Maybe she feared what the room would say if its mouth opened that far. Mara reseated the inner panel carefully, as if dressings mattered to patients made of plastic. The fresh etching, forgiven, disappeared under frost skin. She pressed the seal closed and felt the door kiss itself. "Write it," she told Leah. "Map to phonemes. Note the missing cavity. Document the plug. And put the inscription in the appendix. Someone will want to litigate intention." Leah nodded and began the bureaucratic magic that turns terror into paper. The patrolman went to the landing to babysit the dead transformer in case it tried anything. Reto, summoned back by text, hovered outside the threshold like a man afraid of adding weight to a floor that might not bear it. Mara stood close enough to the refrigerator to hear the motor's small, helpless correctives as it met a world it had not been built for. The interval came late, tried to speak, and faded. Then, 31 seconds later, nothing obliged. She felt the lack like a body does when the kettle usually clicks and forgets to. And then, almost out of politeness, the thinnest version returned, as if memory had found a way to run on less. A whisper of a vowel completing itself where a drip ran along a groove and made a tiny, temporary cavity. On the spectrogram, it barely registered. In the room, it landed exactly where a lullaby sets a hand. Leah lifted her head. "You heard that," she said. "I heard the building remember how to answer itself," Mara said. "Let's not teach it more." She took the bagged square from the bench and looked at its weave until the patterns stopped pretending to be innocent. She did not put it back. She did not destroy it either. Some choices deserve a judge. "Pack up," she told Leah. "We give the cold back to the house that wants it least." Outside, the courtyard had decided to be mourning. Somewhere below their windows, the river rehearsed the day's respectability. In the kitchen, the machine hummed, stripped back to the part of itself that was just a motor and a promise. The last interval found its way through thin air and was gone. By noon, the apartment had borrowed a day's worth of warmth from the sun that does not ask permission before it finds glass. CSU had taken their prints and their fibers, their photographs and their patience. The pantry chalk had been lifted in translucent peels like the skin of something that had shed itself. The refrigerator remained. Emptied of power, powerlessness still humming in it the way seashells keep a rumor. Aaron woke under white lights and hospital linen. Explained to a registrar that grief is not a crime until it borrows wire. He gave his statement with the honesty of a man too tired to be clever. He bought the baffle, he cut the grooves, he tied a line to the doorbell transformer. He refused a speaker because he did not want a lie to sing. He spoke the phrase again, "If the air can hold a prayer, maybe it can hold a child's calm," and it went into the report not as poetry but as the physics of intent. The charge sheet wrote itself in the machine voice of statutes. Endangerment, illegal wiring, trespass at the Rosenfeld Clinic. Reto, with his hat in his hands at the desk, accepted accessory without daring to ask which syllable carried the heavier weight. They did not have a body. They had a braidlet of hair with frost still sleeping in it, minute hemoglobin in the grooves of a portable unit, a bracelet engraved with angles that meant more to hands than to alphabets. They had a fingerprint under ice, Yelena's whirl set in plastic like a fossil of heat. They had a maintenance log that married a cold room's backup cycle to a kitchen's new harmonic as neatly as lines on music paper. They had a sentence cut into an inner panel where only a patient hand could find it. "If it cries, we will be forgiven." Mara wrote the facts until they stopped being arguments and became furniture. She wrote that the lullaby engine could be built by anyone with a baffle, 2 microfans, diamond patience, and a reason. She wrote that acoustic venting through frost channels could produce a periodic cry at thermostat intervals, with consonant-like onsets seeded by small cavities and leaks. She wrote that the knit squares weave functioned as a removable vowel chamber. She wrote about doorbells and transformers, about parasitic feeds and old buildings that forgive trespass by design. She wrote Peridolia for the benefit of men who like their Latin where mercy might otherwise sit. At sunset, she stood in 3BS kitchen and watched the day pour itself down the courtyard like water that had remembered a path. The refrigerator's hum had dwindled to the common modesty of appliances. The lithium pack lay in its evidence box the way a confession lies in a drawer, thin and done. The landing transformer was silent under its scolded cover. Strangers rang bells and learned to wait for footsteps. Leah arrived with the lab's last envelopes like a secular priest with wafers. "Hemoglobin trace in the ice is human," she said, careful. Matches Yelena's profile by a probability that would satisfy anyone except a hope. She laid down the bracelet, its ice gone to memory, the hair sealed like a thin river in plastic. No damage indicating violence. Could be finger cuts, she added, like a lifeline thrown across a dark span. Could be enough to write a vowel, Mara said. They opened the inner door one last time with the reverence of people who had no right to any of this and knew it. The grooves read as neatly as a map now that the eye had been taught their grammar. Melt had begun smoothing their edges. What ice could not bear it turned into water, and water, dutiful, found the channels it had been given and kept to them. Drips moved along the incisions and, where two met, paused, surface tension making a cavity for a second, a little mouth in transit. Listen, Leah said. They did. The compressor was almost quiet enough to ignore. The room made its small domestic noises, the tick of heat in the pipe, a neighbor's plate placed onto a counter, the courtyard's sudden discovery of evening. In that mixture, from the lip of a groove where a drip paused and then committed, a whisper lifted. It lacked breath. It lacked body. It wasn't a cry. It was the childlike vowel they had kept away returning as a courtesy, made not by fans or wires but by water remembering the shape a mouth might have. On the recorder it barely registered, a pencil line at the edge of graph paper. In the room it landed exactly where a lullaby would set its hand, as if obeying an etiquette the machine had learned. Leah swallowed. That's not physics, exactly. It is only physics, Mara said, and felt the treachery of agreeing to either side. It is also what we asked for. She sealed the door. The gasket kissed itself shut. The kitchen shrugged and chose to be an ordinary kitchen again, minus a few centimeters of innocence. She set the bagged knit square with its sibling in a tray marked evidence. Do not test without authorization. The weave looked back like a thing that understood usefulness too well to be trusted with anything else. Her written conclusion read like this: a mechanism, hereafter lullaby engine, was engineered to produce periodic infant-like vocalizations via intake resonance aligned to thermostat cycles. Runes are misread. Marks function as airflow ducting and consonant chambers. A removable knit insert acted as a vowel cavity. Electrical supply was achieved via parasitic feed on a doorbell transformer and lithium pack supporting auxiliary fans. Human overtones present in original recording likely indicate intermittent layering by a human vocal source or environmental coupling. Overtones ceased when supply was cut. The residual vowel during thaw can be explained by transient microcavities formed by melt-water bridging grooves. No evidence of homicide. Insufficient biological material to declare death. Motive: unresolved neonatal loss. Attempt to bind silence through ritualized engineering. Outcome: public safety risk. Psychological injury broad and particular. She did not file the inscription in the appendix. She put it in the body of the report, where juries can trip over it and fall into thought. She added a line that was not procedural and did not apologize. Grief built a machine to make meaning. Meaning, once built, repeats whether or not we deserve it. In the hall, Ulrika Mettler signed for the keys she would later have to cut again. She asked if the apartment would be rentable without a priest. Mara told her yes, because the priest would be expensive and the room had already learned its lesson. Reto, given his citation and his smaller shame, asked if he could scrub the chalk from the pantry himself. No, Mara said. Let the city clean what the city taught you to want. At the hospital, Aaron asked for the blanket and did not get it. He asked for the bracelet and did. He turned it in his hands the way people turn a rosary when the prayer itself cannot be said. He asked where Yelena was, and no one lied to him except in the very clean manner permitted by insufficient evidence. He told a social worker that he had been trying to make a house safe to sleep in. The social worker said something neutral and wrote down words that keep their distance. Near midnight, when the building was a little less sure of itself and the river had decided to be generous about what it would carry, Mara stood again in the kitchen and left the recorder on the counter because habits are the closest thing to faith she allowed. The room breathed and did not apologize. The last interval came so thin she could have missed it if she had wanted to. She did not want to. It wasn't a cry at all. It was the soft cadence of a mother shushing. Not words, not even the shape of a word. just a breath moving over a remembered square, the idea of hush rather than its substance. Leah, who had come back under the pretext of checking a seal, leaned her shoulder to the jamb and listened as if listening itself might constitute a kindness. "We could dismantle it," she said, meaning the grooves, the baffle, the little mouth carved into plastic by the need to teach air. "We could," Mara said. She imagined a judge who would order it, a landlord who would require it, a city that would benefit. She imagined the room empty afterward, obedient, indifferent. And we leave it," Mara said, "with the feed cut and the fans quiet. We leave the throat in the plastic because that is what the plastic is now. We take the plug. We keep the inscription. We give the cold back to the house in the smallest possible dose." Leah nodded. "It will whisper for a while when it thaws." "Everything worth keeping does," Mara said. They turned off their lights. The refrigerator breathed like a thing that had been allowed to become simple again. The courtyard's windows had gathered their evenings and were holding them at polite distances. When the last thin syllable failed even the recorder, there was nothing left to do but write and go home. On her desk, the case file thickened enough to convince paper that paper still mattered. Mara slid the knit squares into evidence, signed her name beneath a paragraph that did not flinch, and closed the folder. Before she did, she wrote one last sentence on the inside cover where no one was required to read it. "Do not teach rooms what you cannot forgive them for remembering." Outside, Zurich kept its secrets under glass and order, but not all of them. Some of them had learned to travel with breath. You've been listening to Echoes Under the Frost here on Somnolent Conspiracies, a case where grief carved grooves in plastic, taught air to cry, and left a city to wonder what meaning lingers when machines remember more than they should. Thank you for staying with us through the cold apartments, the drowned corridors, and the silence that learned to answer itself. These stories live because you listen. If you felt the chill tonight, remember, there are more shadows waiting just off the well-lit streets. We deeply appreciate your time, your patience, and your courage in walking with us through this investigation. Please consider subscribing, tapping the bell, and leaving a like. Your support keeps Somnolent Conspiracies alive. And as always, every shadow holds a story, and we will tell it to you.